Cheating wife story. How I carefully planned my revenge. It started with a whisper, soft, fleeting, and untraceable, like the rustle of leaves before a storm. At first, I ignored it. The thought of infidelity was too alien, too offensive to contemplate. But whispers, when they persist, grow into echoes, and soon the echoes demanded my attention. I remember the moment my suspicion crystallized into certainty. It was a Tuesday evening, unremarkable in every way except for the peculiar absence of her usual warmth. Clara, my wife of 8 years, had always been a beacon of light in our home until she wasn't. Her laughter, once effortless and genuine, had taken on a brittle quality, like glass on the verge of shattering. Her phone, once casually left on countertops and coffee tables, now seemed glued to her hand or tucked away in her purse. She smiled less, spoke less, and when she did, her words felt rehearsed, as though she were reading lines from a poorly written script. Am I imagining this? Am I becoming paranoid? The questions gnawed at me, eating away at my sanity. But the truth doesn't remain hidden for long, not when one is determined to uncover it. Character. Description. Clara was a vision, even on her worst days. Her auburn hair, long and glossy, spilled over her shoulders like molten copper. Her hazel eyes, flecked with gold, had once held a spark that could ignite a room. She was tall, willowy, with a dancer's grace in her movements and a magnetic charisma that drew people to her effortlessly. But it wasn't just her beauty that captivated me, it was her mind. She was intelligent, articulate, and fiercely independent. Her laughter had once been the melody of my life, but now her eyes avoided mine, and her once vibrant smile seemed to fade like a painting left in the sun. My suspicions led me to hire a private investigator, a decision that felt both cowardly and necessary. A week later, I held the evidence in trembling hands, photographs, timestamps, and an address I didn't recognize. Clara and a man I'd never met, tangled in an embrace that left no room for doubt. Rage surged through me, hot and unrelenting. But I quelled it. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation was immediate and emotional. I wanted something colder, something that would sting longer. I spent the next few nights sitting alone in my office, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The photographs lay before me, silent witnesses to her betrayal. Each time I looked at them, a storm raged within me. Anger, hurt, disbelief. But amidst the tempest, a single thought took root. I will not be a victim. I wanted her to feel what I felt, to experience the slow, agonizing unraveling of trust and the suffocating weight of betrayal. But more than that, I wanted her to know that I knew, and I wanted her to question how I knew. The first step was control. Clara couldn't suspect anything, not yet. I kept my demeanor unchanged, forcing myself to laugh at her jokes, kiss her goodbye in the mornings, and even compliment her cooking. It was excruciating, but necessary. If she saw even a hint of my anger, my plan would falter before it began. Setting. The scene. Our home was a testament to the life we'd built together. A spacious craftsman-style house with warm wooden beams and large windows that bathed every room in sunlight. The walls were adorned with photographs of us, laughing on vacation, dancing at our wedding, holding hands in moments of quiet joy. It was a lie, I realized now, an elaborate facade. At night, as Clara slept beside me, her auburn hair fanned across the pillow, I lay awake, my mind crafting the framework of my revenge. It had to be precise, deliberate, and devastating. The why, other man. His name was Ryan. A tall, broad-shouldered man with an easy smile and a self-assuredness that bordered on arrogance. I learned everything I could about him. He was a corporate consultant, unmarried, with a taste for expensive whiskey and women who didn't belong to him. I began to plant seeds, subtle, almost imperceptible moves designed to dismantle the foundation of their illicit relationship. A cryptic message left on his car windshield. "She lies to you too." An anonymous email sent to his work. "Does Clara know about the others?" I wanted him to feel paranoid, to doubt Clara, to question his own decisions. Clara's growing unease. Clara began to notice the subtle shifts. She'd glance at me during dinner, her hazel eyes clouded with uncertainty. "Is everything okay?" she asked one evening, her voice tinged with hesitation. I smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach my eyes. "Of course." "Why wouldn't it be?" Her brow furrowed, but she said nothing more. The turning point. It was a Friday night when the cracks in her composure began to show. Clara had claimed she was meeting friends for drinks, but I knew better. I followed her, parking a safe distance away as she entered a dimly lit bar. Through the window, I saw her slide into a booth where Ryan was already waiting. I watched them for an hour, my heart pounding in my chest. But this wasn't the time for confrontation. Instead, I left a note under her windshield wiper. "You're slipping, Clara." When she returned home later that night, she was visibly shaken. Her hands trembled as she placed her purse on the kitchen counter, and her eyes darted around the room as if searching for something. Or someone. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning concern. "Nothing," she replied too quickly, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. But I could see it, the fear, the doubt, the realization that her carefully constructed web was beginning to unravel. The confrontation had to be perfect, an intricate symphony where every note played exactly as intended. I spent weeks fine-tuning my plan, ensuring no detail was left to chance. It wasn't enough for Clara to feel guilt or shame. I wanted her to understand the depth of her betrayal and the precision of my retribution. Phase 1. Setting the stage. It began with an invitation, a dinner party at our home, ostensibly to celebrate Clara's recent promotion. She was surprised when I suggested it, but I insisted, spinning it as a chance to reconnect with friends. She agreed, though her smile faltered, as if suspecting an ulterior motive. I crafted the guest list carefully, including mutual friends, a few colleagues, and most importantly, Ryan. The key was making sure he didn't know he was walking into a trap. An anonymous text sent from a burner phone sealed the deal. "Clara wants you there. It's important." The night of reckoning. The evening arrived, and our home was immaculate. The dining table was set with our finest china, candles flickering softly against the polished wood. Clara, radiant in a sapphire blue dress, flitted around the room, greeting guests and pouring drinks. She seemed nervous, her laughter a touch too loud, her movements a bit too quick. And then Ryan arrived. I watched from across the room as Clara's smile froze for the briefest of moments. She recovered quickly, greeting him with a casualness. That didn't fool me. Ryan, oblivious to the tension, joined the group, his booming laughter filling the air. Phase 2. The reveal dinner was a masterpiece. Roast lamb, herbed potatoes, and a dessert that Clara had spent hours preparing. Conversation flowed easily, though I noticed Clara's eyes darting to me, searching for any sign of what might come next. I waited until dessert was served. The room was warm with the hum of laughter and clinking glasses. I stood, raising my wine glass for a toast. "To Clara," I began, my voice steady, "for her promotion, and for being the most remarkable woman I've ever known." She smiled, her relief palpable. But I wasn't done. "And to the people who make life unpredictable," I continued, my gaze locking on Ryan. "To new friends and old, and the choices that define us." The room fell silent, an undercurrent of tension rippling through the air. Clara's hand trembled as she set her glass down. Phase 3. The evidence. I reached beneath the table and produced a small, leather-bound photo album. "I wanted to share some memories," I said, my tone deceptively light. "Clara, you've always said we should preserve the important moments." I opened the album and slid it across the table. The first few pages were innocuous. Pictures of us on vacation, at family gatherings. Then came the photos from the private investigator. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Ryan's face darkened, his earlier confidence evaporating. The room erupted in murmurs as our friends leaned in to see the damning evidence. "What is this?" Clara stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's the truth," I said calmly. "Something you seem to have misplaced along the way." The final blow. I let the silence stretch, savoring the weight of her guilt and Ryan's humiliation. Then, I delivered the coup de grace. "I've filed for divorce," I announced, pulling a manila envelope from beneath my chair. "The papers are signed and ready. You'll find I've been more than generous in the settlement. But there's one condition. You walk out of this house tonight and never return." Clara's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ryan sat frozen, his bravado completely shattered. The room was heavy with shock, our friends too stunned to speak. One by one, they began to leave, murmuring awkward goodbyes as Clara and Ryan sat in stunned silence. Aftermath. When the house was finally empty, Clara tried to speak, her voice breaking as she begged for forgiveness. But I had nothing left to say. "You made your choices," I said quietly, meeting her tear-filled gaze. "Now live with them." As she walked out the door, suitcase in hand, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The pain was still there, but so was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild free from the weight of betrayal. The house felt unnaturally quiet after she left, like the stillness after a thunderstorm. For a while, I simply stood in the living room, staring at the door Clara had walked through for the last time. The weight of everything hit me all at once. The betrayal, the anger, the months of planning. It was over now, but the emptiness that followed was far heavier than I'd anticipated. The days that followed. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. But the house seemed colder, emptier. Her absence was a phantom that lingered in every corner, in the half-empty closet, in the faint scent of her perfume on the pillows. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, I felt untethered. I threw myself into work, taking on every project that came my way. Late nights at the office were better than coming home to the silence. My colleagues noticed the change. Some offered sympathetic smiles, others a concerned word or two. But I kept my answers short. I wasn't ready to talk about it. Ryan's fallout news of the dinner party spread quickly, as I'd expected it would. Mutual friends avoided the subject around me, but I heard whispers. How Ryan had been humiliated, how his reputation had taken a hit. Apparently, he tried reaching out to Clara afterward, but whatever bond they'd shared had disintegrated under the weight of guilt and scrutiny. Good. He deserved every ounce of it. Clara's attempts. Clara tried to contact me several times in the weeks that followed. First, it was calls and voicemails, tearful apologies, desperate pleas for a second chance. Then came the emails, long and rambling, detailing how she'd lost her way, how she still loved me, how she'd do anything to make it right. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Her words felt hollow, a too-late attempt to salvage what she'd destroyed. Eventually, the messages stopped. Rebuilding myself. I started therapy a month after Clara left. At first, I was hesitant. What could a stranger possibly tell me about? My own life? But as the sessions went on, I found myself unraveling layers I hadn't even realized were there. The betrayal wasn't just about Clara. It was about my own insecurities, my fear of not being enough, of being replaceable. The therapist helped me see that my revenge, while satisfying in the moment, hadn't healed me. It had been a way to regain control, to level the playing field. But true healing required something more: forgiveness, not for Clara, but for myself. A fresh start. 6 months later, the house no longer felt like a monument to what I'd lost. I redecorated, painting over walls that once held photos of us, replacing furniture that bore too many memories. I invited friends over, not to talk about what had happened, but to create new memories in a space that was entirely mine now. One evening, a colleague introduced me to someone new. Her name was Evelyn, a writer with a sharp wit and a laugh that lit up the room. She wasn't like Clara. Where Clara had been polished and poised, Evelyn was spontaneous and refreshingly honest. We started slow, meeting for coffee and walks in the park. I wasn't ready for anything serious, and Evelyn understood that. She didn't push, didn't pry. She simply existed in the moment, and for the first time in a long time, I felt myself breathing easier. Reflection. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled Clara's betrayal. It was messy and imperfect, but it was my way of reclaiming my agency. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that betrayal doesn't define you. How you rise from it does. Clara became a chapter in my life, not the entire story. And as I sat on a park bench one crisp autumn evening, watching Evelyn laugh at something ridiculous I'd said, I realized the most important thing. I'd finally turned the page. Evelyn and I met at an art gallery. It wasn't an intentional date, just a chance encounter orchestrated by mutual friends who swore we'd get along. I'd almost skipped the event entirely, hesitant to face the awkward small talk and the inevitable questions about Clara. But there Evelyn was, standing in front of a striking abstract piece, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What do you think it means?" I asked, breaking the silence. She turned, her expression softening into a wry smile. "Probably something pretentious," she replied, tilting her head. "But I like the colors." Her honesty disarmed me, and we spent the next hour weaving through the gallery, sharing opinions that veered between thoughtful and ridiculous, a slow burn. Evelyn and I didn't dive headfirst into anything serious. She had her own scars, divorce, a failed business venture, and the guardedness that comes from learning to trust again. In a way, her hesitations mirrored my own, and it created a bond we didn't need to articulate. We started small. Coffee. On Saturday mornings at a quiet cafe tucked away from the bustling streets. Walks along the river where we talked about everything from books to childhood dreams. She introduced me to her favorite novels, dog-eared copies filled with underlined passages and handwritten notes in the margins. One evening, she handed me a copy of a poetry anthology, her eyes hesitant. "This one got me through some rough times," she said softly. I read it that night, the words resonating in a way I hadn't expected. When I returned the book, I'd underlined a line of my own. "We grow not despite the cracks, but because of them." She smiled when she saw it, and in that moment, I realized I was beginning to heal. Rediscovering myself. Evelyn had a way of pulling me out of my shell, of reminding me who I was before Clara and everything that followed. She encouraged me to pursue hobbies I'd let fall by the wayside: photography, hiking, even cooking. "You can't live on takeout forever," she teased one evening, holding up a bag of groceries. I learned to enjoy the simple pleasure of making a meal from scratch, of sharing it with someone who didn't just tolerate my quirks but celebrated them. Evelyn's laughter filled the spaces that had once felt so empty, her presence turning the house into a home again. Building something new, The turning point came on a weekend trip to the mountains. Evelyn had insisted we needed a break from the city, and I reluctantly agreed. The cabin was rustic but charming, nestled among towering pines with a view of the lake. On the second morning, we woke early to watch the sunrise. Wrapped in blankets, we sat on the porch as the sky shifted from inky black to brilliant shades of orange and pink. I used to think I'd never feel this again, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn didn't press me for details. She simply reached for my hand, her touch warm and steady. Sometimes, the hardest part is letting yourself believe you deserve it. Moving forward. Over time, Evelyn and I built something that felt genuine and unburdened by the past. It wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is, but it was honest. I stopped avoiding conversations about Clara, sharing bits and pieces of my story when the moments felt right. Evelyn listened without judgment, her empathy a quiet reassurance. 1. Evening, as we sat on the couch surrounded by the soft glow of candlelight, she leaned into me, her voice thoughtful. "You're not the same man you were then," she said. "And that's a good thing." She was right. I wasn't. The future Evelyn and I didn't rush into declarations of forever. Instead, we focused on the present, savoring the moments that made life feel full again. There were still challenges, navigating trust, balancing independence with connection, but each step forward felt like a victory. With her, I learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to carry it differently. And as I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Evelyn beside me, I realized something profound. The chapter I was writing now was one I'd never trade for anything. The echoes of betrayal. Even with Clara and Ryan out of my life, the betrayal lingered like a shadow in the corners of my mind. I couldn't let it go entirely, not yet. I had exacted my revenge, but it was only the beginning. The damage they had caused deserved more than a single act of humiliation. It deserved a ripple effect that would keep them from rising unscathed. Phase 4. Financial precision. Clara had always been meticulous with money, a skill that had served us well during our marriage. Unfortunately for her, I had been even more meticulous. While she had been distracted by Ryan, I had been quietly unraveling the tangled web of our shared finances. I unearthed evidence of her indiscretions, dinners, hotel stays, and gifts she had billed to our joint accounts. Armed with this, I contacted my lawyer, ensuring every penny spent on her affair was accounted for. My divorce settlement, while generous on paper, came with stipulations that drained her more than she realized. She kept the house, but only after buying out my share, a transaction that left her savings account nearly empty. And I kept the one thing she had underestimated, my investment portfolio, the quiet empire I had built long before we married. Phase 5. Ryan's reckoning. Ryan wasn't immune to consequences either. His career had always been precariously balanced on his charm and connections. But charm doesn't hold up well under the weight of public humiliation. Through a carefully orchestrated series of anonymous tips to his employer, whispers about his conduct began to circulate. I made sure the evidence pointed not only to his unprofessional behavior, but also to conflicts of interest that couldn't be ignored. It didn't take long for him to lose his most lucrative clients. His reputation crumbled, and with it, the facade he had carefully crafted. The confrontation that never came. I expected Clara or Ryan to retaliate, to confront me in some dramatic showdown, but neither did. Perhaps they realized they were outmatched, or maybe they simply didn't have the energy to fight back. The silence was almost disappointing. Part of me had wanted to face them one last time, to see the anger, the regret, the defeat in their eyes. But the absence of their response only cemented my victory. Turning the page one evening, months after the dust had settled, I found myself sitting on the patio of my new apartment, a glass of bourbon in hand. The city skyline stretched before me, alive with lights and movement. I had done what I set out to do. I had reclaimed my life, rebuilt my sense of self, and taken control in a way that left no room for doubt. But revenge, as satisfying as it wasn't the answer to everything. The scars of betrayal didn't vanish simply because I had turned the tables. They remained, a reminder of what I had endured and what I had overcome. It was time to move forward, not for Clara, not for Ryan, but for myself. The unintended ripple's revenge is never a clean act. It's like dropping a stone into still water. The splash is deliberate, but the ripples extend far beyond what you anticipate. I knew there would be consequences beyond Clara and Ryan, but I hadn't truly considered how far-reaching they'd be. Friends caught in the crossfire. Our social circle was the first to feel the aftershocks. Clara and I had shared many mutual friends, some of whom I genuinely cared for. When news of her betrayal and my meticulously planned revenge began to spread, people chose sides. Some, like our closest couple friends, sided with me. They expressed their support, with awkward but heartfelt condolences that often came with an unspoken undercurrent of curiosity about just how much of the rumors were true. Others, especially those who had been closer to Clara, distanced themselves, either out of loyalty to her or discomfort with the situation. I'd expected this division, but the loss of certain friendships stung. There were people I'd thought would stick around, only to find them drifting away, their absence as loud as a slammed door. Family reactions. My family, on the other hand, reacted with a mix of pride and concern. My sister, ever the fiery defender of justice, called me in fits of laughter after hearing about the dinner party. "You're a legend," she said, barely able to contain her amusement. "Mom always said you had a flair for the dramatic, but this takes the cake." But my parents were more measured. My father, a stoic man who rarely ventured into emotional territory, merely nodded when I recounted the events. "You did what you had to do," he said, "but don't let it consume you." My mother, however, was less subtle. "It's time to let go, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You've proven your point. Now prove you can rise above it." Professional reverberations at work. The story had a quieter impact. My colleagues were discreet, but I caught the occasional knowing glance or overheard whispers in the break room. One day, my boss called me into his office. "I'm not one to pry into personal matters," he began, his tone careful. "But whatever you're dealing with, you've handled it with remarkable composure." It was a veiled acknowledgement, and I took it as a sign that my professional reputation had remained intact. If anything, the ordeal seemed to have earned me a newfound respect among some of my peers. Ryan's fallout and the business community, Ryan's downfall, though satisfying, had unintended consequences for the business community we both inhabited. His clients scrambled to find new representation, and the sudden vacuum left behind created an air of tension and uncertainty. One of Ryan's former clients reached out to me, offering a lucrative contract. I hesitated, knowing the connection could lead to uncomfortable questions. But ultimately, I accepted. As we finalized the agreement, the client smirked. "I heard about your creative way of handling things," he said, his tone amused. "Let's just say I admire your decisiveness, the burden of victory." While some admired my actions, others looked at me differently. A few acquaintances, people I wouldn't call friends, seemed wary of me, as if my capacity for calculated revenge had made me dangerous in their eyes. It was a sobering realization. I hadn't intended to alienate people who might have been allies, but my actions had painted me as someone to be both respected and feared. Lessons from the Rippleses. The weeks turned into months. I came to terms with the ripple effects. Some relationships were irreparably altered, but others had deepened. I discovered who my true friends were, those who didn't shy away from the messy aftermath, but stood by me with quiet, unwavering support. And through it all, I learned something invaluable. Revenge might be satisfying in the moment, but the true measure of strength lies in what you build after the storm has passed. Rebuilding the foundation trust. It was a word that once came easily, rolling off my tongue like a promise I believed the world would keep. But after Clara and Ryan, trust became something fragile, an intricate glass sculpture, beautiful but terrifying to hold. I didn't shut myself off completely. I knew that wasn't the answer. But I did tread carefully, recalibrating my approach to relationships and connection, guarded but not unreachable. In the aftermath, I became more deliberate about who I let into my life. I no longer mistook proximity for loyalty or charm for sincerity. Instead, I paid attention to actions, the small, consistent gestures that reveal a person's true character over time. If someone showed up when it mattered, offered kindness without expectation, or stood by me without demanding to be the center of my world, I allowed myself to lower my guard, inch by cautious inch. But I also learned to recognize red flags, no matter how subtle. A dismissive comment, a veiled insult, or a tendency to deflect blame. These were warning signs I no longer ignored. Trust as a choice. One of the hardest lessons was realizing that trust isn't just given. It's a choice, a leap of faith. And it's a choice I had to make repeatedly, even knowing the risks. With Evelyn, for instance, trust didn't come instantly. I scrutinized her words and actions, searching for cracks in the veneer. But as weeks turned to months, her consistency reassured me. She didn't just say the right things, she lived them. There were moments when my doubts surfaced, uninvited. What if she had secrets too? What if history repeated itself? "You don't have to trust me all at once," she said one evening, her voice calm and steady. "Just trust me enough to let me prove I'm not her." Boundaries as protection. Another shift was my newfound appreciation for boundaries. I stopped conflating closeness with the absence of personal space. I set clear lines about what I would and wouldn't tolerate, and I expected the same in return. This wasn't about building walls to keep people out. It was about creating a framework where respect and honesty could thrive, connection with depth. Interestingly, my wariness didn't make my connections weaker. It made them stronger. By being intentional about who I let in, I found relationships that were more meaningful and genuine. I learned to listen, not just to what people said, but to what they didn't say. I paid attention to how they treated others, how they handled adversity, and how they responded to vulnerability. In return, I became more open, too. Slowly, cautiously, but with sincerity. I shared my story, not the polished version, but the raw truth. And in doing so, I discovered that honesty breeds honesty, the gift of forgiveness. Perhaps the most unexpected part of my journey was learning to forgive, not just Clara and Ryan, but also myself. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing their actions. It meant letting go of the anger that had chained me to the past. It meant acknowledging that their betrayal said more about them than it ever did about me, and forgiving myself. That was the hardest part. I had to accept that trusting Clara wasn't a mistake. It was a reflection of my belief in love and loyalty. That belief had been exploited, but it wasn't wrong. A new chapter, a new trust as I sit here now, penning this reflection. I realize that trust, like anything worth having, requires work. It's not a gift you give blindly. It's a garden you tend, nurturing it with time, patience, and care. The events with Clara and Ryan didn't destroy my ability to trust, they refined it. They taught me that trust isn't about guaranteeing the absence of betrayal. It's about having the strength to rebuild even when betrayal occurs. The trials of a new path life doesn't grant you peace simply because you've learned a lesson. It tests you relentlessly, ensuring the changes you've made are genuine. My resolve to trust deliberately and forgive deeply wasn't immune to scrutiny. There were moments that pushed me to my limits, forcing me to confront my fears and reinforce the boundaries I had so carefully constructed. The test of trust. The first real challenge came with Evelyn. She had been a beacon of kindness in my post-Clara world, but as our relationship deepened, so did the shadows of my past. One night I caught her texting someone late, her expression guarded. The old wound flared, raw and unbidden. My mind raced, conjuring scenarios that mirrored Clara's betrayal. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steady but taut. Evelyn looked up, startled. "It's my brother," she said, holding out her phone without hesitation. "He's going through a rough time, and I didn't want to burden you with it." I scanned the messages. There was nothing to hide. Relief flooded me, but shame wasn't far behind. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I confessed my fears. "It's not you," I said. "It's what I've been through. Sometimes it feels like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop." She turned to me, her voice soft but firm. "I get it, and I'll do what I can to reassure you. But trust isn't just about what I do. It's about you deciding to let me in." The power of forgiveness I'd learned, was more of an internal process than an external gesture. And nowhere was this more evident than when I ran into Clara months after our divorce. It was in a grocery store of all places, the humdrum fluorescent lights casting an unflattering glow over our encounter. She looked older, the weight of her choices etched into her face. "James," she said, her voice hesitant. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I'm sorry, truly." For a moment I was silent. The anger that once consumed me had dulled, replaced by a quiet understanding. "I've already forgiven you," I said finally. "Not for your sake, but for mine." Carrying that anger was like drinking poison and expecting you to feel the effects. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but I didn't linger. This wasn't about her redemption, it was about my peace, a broader perspective. These experiences didn't just shape my relationships. They reshaped my entire outlook on life. I realized that everyone carries scars, and often, their actions are less about me and more about their own struggles and insecurities. It didn't mean excusing betrayal or turning a blind eye to red flags, but it did mean approaching life with a measure of grace. I learned to balance self-protection with empathy, recognizing that vulnerability, while risky, is also what makes connection possible. The ripple of forgiveness in forgiving Clara and Ryan. I also found it easier to forgive others in smaller, everyday ways. A colleague who missed a deadline, a friend who canceled plans last minute, a stranger who cut me off in traffic. These moments no longer carried the weight they once did. And perhaps most importantly, I forgave myself, not just for trusting the wrong people, but for holding on to the hurt for so long. A future rewritten now, trust feels less like a gamble and more like a calculated investment. I've stopped seeking guarantees and instead focus on building relationships that can withstand the inevitable storms. Forgiveness, too, has become a compass, guiding me toward peace rather than resentment. It's not about forgetting or condoning. It's about choosing to release the hold that pain has on your life. And as I continue this journey, I carry with me a quiet assurance that even in the face of betrayal, there's always a path forward, paved with intention, resilience, and hope. Scene 1. Testing trust with Evelyn. The late-night hum of the city outside the window was almost hypnotic. a distant backdrop to my racing thoughts. Evelyn was sitting cross-legged on the couch, her phone glowing faintly in the dimly lit room. I caught the furrow in her brow, the way her lips tightened ever so slightly. Something was wrong. Or was it just me? I hesitated, watching her from the kitchen as I poured a glass of water. The rational part of me urged patience, but the scars of the past whispered louder. What if she's hiding something? What if this is Clara all over again? I walked into the room, the soft creak of the floorboards catching her attention. She looked up, startled, and quickly locked her phone. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my tone casual, though my chest felt tight. Her eyes searched mine, and for a brief moment I saw confusion flicker across her face. Then, as if understanding the unspoken question, she unlocked her phone and handed it to me. "It's my brother," she said simply. "He's having a rough time, and I didn't want to burden you with it." I stared at the messages, reading the worried exchanges between her and her brother. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by guilt. "I'm sorry, I said, handing her the phone. "It's not about you. It's about what I've been through. I want to trust, but sometimes—" Evelyn reached for my hand, her grip firm but gentle. "I'm not her, James, but I get it. Trust takes time. Just don't let your past make you miss out on what's right in front of you." Her words lingered long after the night ended, planting the seed of a new understanding. Trust wasn't a guarantee. It was a choice I had to make every day. Scene 2. Encountering Clara. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store buzzed faintly, the air thick with the sterile scent of floor polish and ripe produce. I had just reached for a carton of eggs when I saw her. Clara. She froze mid-step, a basket dangling from her arm, her expression a mixture of surprise and apprehension. The years since our last interaction had softened her edges. She looked older, worn as though carrying the weight of her own guilt. "James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't expect to see you here." I straightened, clutching the eggs a little tighter than necessary. Neither did I. She hesitated, glancing down at the linoleum floor before meeting my gaze again. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I'm sorry, truly, for everything." The words hung in the air, fragile and trembling. I took a deep breath, feeling the anger that once burned so fiercely now reduced to embers. "I've already forgiven you," I said, my voice steady. "Not for your sake, but for mine." Holding on to that anger, "It didn't hurt you. It only hurt me." Her eyes glistened, and she nodded, her lips pressing into a tight line. There was nothing more to say. As I turned and walked away, a strange sense of peace settled over me. Forgiveness wasn't about absolution, it was about release. Scene 3. Building new connections. The conference room was abuzz with chatter, a mingling of voices and clinking coffee cups. It was my first networking event since everything had unfolded, and while I wore a confident smile, my nerves hummed just beneath the surface. A man approached, his handshake firm and his smile easy. "James, right? I've heard a lot about you." "Good things, I hope," I replied with a small laugh. He chuckled. "Depends on who you ask. But I respect someone who knows how to stand their ground." The implication was clear. My story had preceded me. Instead of shrinking away, I leaned into it. "Standing your ground is easy when you know what you stand for," I said. The man raised his cup in a silent toast. "Well said." As the conversation flowed, I realized that the scars of my past hadn't made me weaker. They had made me more discerning, more intentional. And that discernment was building connections that felt deeper and more genuine than anything I'd known before. Shaping my career. A new vision of leadership. In the aftermath of the betrayal, I found myself reassessing everything, even the way I viewed my work. Before Clara, I had been a workaholic, driven by ambition, seeking validation from my professional achievements. But now, there was a quiet shift in my approach. My career wasn't just about the external accolades anymore. It had become about creating something meaningful, something that reflected my values. The first test at work. It happened a few months after I had made peace with my past. I was offered a leadership position in a new department, a promotion. That had always been my dream. On paper, it was everything I wanted. But when I walked into the new office, I realized something had changed within me. I no longer cared about status for status's sake. What mattered now was the impact I could make on others. As I gathered the team for the first time, I felt an unfamiliar sense of hesitation. These were people who didn't know me, who weren't privy to my history. I could easily slip into the old persona, the one who demanded respect through power and control. But I knew that approach was a relic of the past. I stood at the front of the room, looking at the faces before me. I'm not here to dictate or micromanage. I'm here to support you and make sure you have what you need to succeed, I said, my voice steady, but infused with a new depth of sincerity. I could see the surprise in their eyes. They weren't used to hearing a boss speak in such terms. I believe in building trust, I continued. Trust is the foundation of any successful team, and I'm asking you to trust me to support you, not just as employees, but as individuals. We'll succeed or fail together. There was a moment of silence, then a slow nod from the team, followed by cautious smiles. This was new. This was vulnerability. The ripple effect on leadership. Over the following months, I made it a point to cultivate an environment of openness and honesty. I encouraged my team to speak their minds, to share their concerns without fear of repercussions. I was transparent about challenges, not pretending to have all the answers, but inviting collaboration. The results were almost immediate. Projects moved more smoothly. Deadlines were met without the tension and stress that usually accompanied them. There was a newfound sense of camaraderie, and the bond between me and my team grew stronger with every passing week. It became clear that leadership at its core was not about wielding power. It was about creating an atmosphere where people felt safe, respected, and valued. Trust and empathy, I realized, were the true currencies of effective leadership. Shaping. Family life. The value of connection. The changes in my approach to trust and forgiveness had a profound impact on my relationships with family, particularly my parents and siblings. The moment with my father. My relationship with my father had always been strained. He was a man of few words, a provider in the traditional sense, but emotionally distant. In the past, I had resented him for his inability to express affection or engage in deep conversations. But after everything with Clara, I began to understand that his way of showing love was different, shaped by his own upbringing and struggles. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to visit him. It wasn't an occasion, it was just a quiet gesture of connection. He was in the garage fixing an old car. When I approached, he barely looked up but nodded in acknowledgement. "I've been thinking," I said, breaking the silence, "about how we never really talk. You know, about life, about things that matter." My father paused, wiping grease from his hands. He looked at me with a seriousness I wasn't used to. "I'm not good with words, James. Never have been. But you know I'm proud of you, right?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. "I do now, but I needed to hear it sooner." He cleared his throat, his voice softer. "I know, but that's the way I was raised. Actions speak louder than words. I did my best to provide for you and your mother. That's all I knew how to do." We stood there in silence, a silence that felt less oppressive than it ever had before. I Realized then that my father's love wasn't in his words. It was in his actions, in the quiet sacrifices he made. That afternoon, we worked on the car together side by side, the distance between us shrinking in ways words never could. It was in that shared silence that I truly understood him, and I forgave him for all the things left unsaid. A new approach. With my siblings. My siblings had always been supportive, but after Clara's betrayal, I realized I had distanced myself from them. I became too focused on my own pain, and in doing so, I unintentionally shut them out. One evening, I invited my sister Rachel over for dinner. She was the first to notice the change in me. "You're different," she said as she set down her wine glass. The continuing evolution, a broader perspective on life. The lessons I learned from betrayal, forgiveness, and trust became the cornerstone of a broader transformation in all aspects of my life. As the years unfolded, I realized that the ripple effect of those early, painful experiences was still shaping my decisions and relationships. There was a subtle but profound shift in how I viewed everything, from personal ambition to the simple joy of connecting with others. The echoes of those lessons continued to reverberate, molding me into someone entirely new. Scene 1. Rekindling. Lost friendships. There had been friends I had lost touch with over the years, some due to the chaos of my past relationship, others because I had become so inwardly focused. These friendships were casualties of the emotional walls I had built around myself, walls that had grown higher as the years passed. One afternoon, I found myself walking through a park near my old neighborhood, a place that once held so many memories. As I passed by the familiar bench where I'd spent countless hours with a childhood friend, I saw him. Michael. He looked the same, taller now, with a few more lines on his face, but still that same easygoing smile. "James," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and warmth. "It's been years, man. How have you been?" The old tension in me tightened, the instinct to pull away, to shield myself from the vulnerability of reconnecting. But then, I thought of everything I had learned, the value of trust, of allowing myself to embrace the people who once meant so much. "I've been changing," I said, my voice quieter than usual, a reflection of the honesty I had come to embrace. Michael chuckled, sitting down beside me on the bench. "Yeah, we all have, I think. The last time we talked, you were lost in your own head." I nodded, looking at him for the first time in years. I was. And I'm sorry. I shut a lot of people out, you included. There was a moment of silence, but this time it was comfortable, like a shared understanding between us, an acknowledgement of the time lost, but not wasted. "It's okay," Michael finally said. "You had your reasons. We all go through our own stuff, but I'm glad you're back." And just like that, with a simple exchange, we were no longer two strangers who had once been friends. We were two people who had found each other again, who had the opportunity to rebuild what was broken. Scene 2. The Unlikely Mentor. The lessons I had learned through pain and growth eventually guided me toward an unexpected role: mentorship. At first, I dismissed the idea. How could I, someone who had been so profoundly affected by betrayal, offer guidance to others? But I soon realized that my journey could be the very thing that helped someone else avoid the same mistakes. It was during a leadership workshop that I first encountered her, Lily, a young woman in her 20s who had recently been promoted to a managerial role. She was bright, driven, but she carried the same weight I had once carried. I saw it in her eyes, the fear of not being good enough, the insecurity that came from questioning her own judgment. After the session, she approached me, her hesitance palpable. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could I ask you for some advice?" Her Words stirred something inside me, a sense of duty to share what I had learned. "Of course," I said, motioning for her to sit. As she poured out her worries, her frustration with her team, her fear of making mistakes, I realized that I had the tools to guide her, not with a sense of superiority, but with the kind of understanding that could only come from experience. "Trust your team," I told her. "Lead with empathy, not control. People work better when they feel seen, not just as employees, but as individuals. And always, always remember that mistakes are part of the process. Don't let them define you." Her eyes brightened as she took in my words. "I've been afraid to let people see my vulnerability. I thought it would make me weak." I smiled, shaking my head. "Vulnerability is strength. It's what makes you human, and it's what will make you a great leader." As she left, a weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. I could see it in the way she stood, the renewed sense of purpose in her stride, and I knew deep within me that this was why I had gone through everything I had. So I could help others navigate the terrain I had once stumbled through. Scene 3. A new chapter in romance. After Evelyn, after the healing and the revelations, I found myself open to love again. But it wasn't the same as before. I wasn't seeking to fill a void or to prove my worth to anyone. This time, love wasn't a pursuit. It was a natural, easy connection, built on mutual understanding and respect. One evening, I sat on a rooftop with Clara, the woman who had been through her own journey of growth. She wasn't perfect. None of us were. But there was a quiet beauty in her honesty. Scene 4. The return of old shadows. A test of trust. Even in the most transformative chapters of life, there are moments when the shadows of the past return to test our resolve. I knew this. I had been prepared for it. But when the phone call came, it felt like a cruel reminder that no matter how much I had changed, certain echoes would never truly disappear. It was late one evening. I had just returned home from a long day at work when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The name that appeared on the screen sent a shiver down my spine. Clara. At first I hesitated. I had moved on, or so I thought. I had a new relationship, a growing career, and a burgeoning sense of inner peace. But something about her name on that screen dragged me back to the darker days, those sleepless nights where betrayal haunted my every thought. I picked up the phone, my hand almost trembling. "James," she said, her voice shaking, as if she hadn't expected me to answer. I need to talk to you." There it was, that familiar, almost frantic tone that once had the power to make my heart race. I could feel my pulse quicken, the walls inside me rising before I could stop them. "About what?" I asked, my tone neutral, controlled. I had learned that control was power, and right now I needed every ounce of it. "I messed up," she whispered. "I don't know what's happening in my life right now, but I need to explain everything. I didn't mean to hurt you." I closed my eyes, listening to her words. It wasn't the first time she had said something like this, and yet it felt different, more fragile, more desperate. Still, I knew better than to rush in and allow old patterns to repeat themselves. I exhaled slowly, my mind racing. How far have I really come? What does this mean for everything I've worked to rebuild? "I think," I said, my voice calm, perhaps too calm. "You need to find a way to heal, Clara. We can't keep going around in circles." I could hear her breathe out a sob on the other end. And for a moment, I almost reached out, almost let the old vulnerability slip through, the cracks. But I stayed rooted. "I'm not who I was before. I can't just be dragged back into that world with you. Not anymore." Scene 5. The test of inner peace, forgiveness. Without repetition. The next few days were filled with silence, but not the kind of silence that brings peace. Instead, it was filled with tension, the kind that arises when something unsaid looms, heavily between two people. I thought I had closed that door, and yet here I was, standing on the threshold once more. I spent those days revisiting everything I had learned. I questioned myself. Had I forgiven too quickly? Was there room in my heart for her to have a place in my life again? I had come so far, built a new foundation. But did that mean I had to sacrifice my boundaries in the name of compassion? I found solace in small rituals, journaling, meditation, quiet walks in the park. These were my anchors, the practices that had kept me grounded when everything else felt out of control. I reminded myself that healing wasn't linear. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt. But the core of who I had become, the person who could lead with trust, who had embraced vulnerability, had to remain intact. That evening, as I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my teeth, I saw the reflection of the man I had become. There was strength in him now, not the frailty that once existed in his wake of betrayal. I wasn't broken anymore. I had been remade. But as my phone buzzed once again, the weight of the past crept back in. It was Clara. This time there was no hesitation. I answered. "What do you need, Clara?" I asked. Her voice, softer this time, almost tender. "I'm not asking you to take me back. I just need you to know that I'm sorry, that I understand why I hurt you. I've changed too, in my own way. I just don't want you to think that what we had didn't matter." There was a silence. On my end, and for the first time in years, I truly thought about it. What did it mean for something to matter? Was it enough to simply forgive? Or was true forgiveness more about letting go, not just of the anger, but the expectation that things would ever be the same? I sighed, my heart heavy with the weight of the past. "I'm not angry anymore, Clara. I've let go of all of that." She paused. "Then, why don't we just let this go too?" And for the first time, I realized that I didn't need to carry the weight of her apology. I didn't need to prove my own growth by reopening old wounds. "I'm letting go," I whispered. "But we can't go back, not as we were. It's time to move forward, separately." And with that, the door to the past clicked shut, quietly and without fanfare. I didn't need her to complete me. I didn't need her to apologize for what had happened. I had learned to forgive myself, to rebuild my own life, and to trust again, not just others, but myself. Scene 6. Embracing the future. A life reclaimed days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but something in me had shifted forever. I wasn't afraid of being vulnerable anymore, nor was I afraid to trust, whether it was in work, family, or in love. The future no longer felt like an uncertain abyss, but a space of endless possibility, a place where I had the power to create my own narrative. At work, my team continued to thrive. I learned to invest more deeply in each person's growth, to see their potential not through the lens of performance but through the lens of understanding. And in my personal life, the relationships I had built were grounded in the principles of honesty, respect, and patience. As for love, it had become a quiet, steady force in my life, not something I chased or clung to, but something that blossomed organically. A love built on a foundation of trust, of shared experiences, and of mutual growth. And as I sat in the quiet of my apartment one evening, reflecting on all that had come to pass, I realized that the most profound lesson I had learned wasn't about trust or forgiveness. It was about living authentically, about owning my story, the good, the bad, and the painful, and using it to shape the life I wanted. The past no longer held the power to define me. I was the author of my own narrative now, and with every choice I made, I was writing a story of resilience, redemption, and unwavering strength.